A brutal impact sent my head snapping to the side, the crack echoing through the opulent living room of Whitestone Manor. The festive chatter, the soft hum of holiday music, everything died instantly. 50 pairs of eyes wide with horror fixed on me, champagne flutes frozen mid-air. The fairy lights on the towering fir tree seemed to mock the trickle of blood already warming my upper lip. "You bumbling fool!" Victor Callahan's roar ripped through the sudden silence, his voice reverberating off the gilded ceilings and crystal chandeliers. "Look what you've done to my suit! That fabric alone costs more than you see in 6 months." A few drops of water from a glass I'd stumbled with behind his armchair still dripped onto the imported marble floor. Just water. "My name is Samuel Torres. I'm 38 years old. And I'd just been struck by my wife's father, Victor Callahan, in front of Providence's elite during their annual Christmas gala. I touched my nose, the swelling already apparent, the metallic tang of blood filling my mouth. My gaze frantically swept the stunned faces searching for Lillian. My wife stood by the fireplace, a vision in her emerald gown, but her expression wasn't one of shock or anger at the assault. It was shame, shame of me, Samuel. You need to apologize to my father now. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as the December wind outside. Those words hit harder than any punch. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. Lawyers, entrepreneurs, old money families, all watching the carpenter who dared to marry into the Callahan legacy. "Lillian, I started, my voice hoarse. "Apologize," she repeated, each syllable clipped as if speaking to a wayward child, "or get out of my house." Victor crossed his arms, the water stain on his pristine white shirt a glaring accusation. The cruel glint in his eyes told me everything. This wasn't about a spilled drink. It was about power. It was about putting me firmly in my place. I scanned the room again. No one spoke. Not a single guest questioned why a man in his early 60s had assaulted someone over a minor mishap. They simply waited to see if I would grovel or have the dignity to leave. For 5 long years, I'd swallowed every subtle insult, every patronizing joke about my profession, every dismissive glance. I'd always believed Lillian would stand by me when it truly mattered. I'd always thought our love was stronger than their endless wealth. I was wrong. I wiped the blood from my nose with the back of my hand, my eyes locked on Victor's. The silence stretched, an eternity. Then for the first time in my life, I did the unexpected. I smiled. "You're right," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady. "I don't belong here." And I left. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors, just a quiet walk towards the grand oak doors, the murmurs of surprise rising behind me. What they didn't know was that for the past 8 months I had been preparing for this very moment. Small signs, hushed conversations, strange looks, everything pointed to the Callahans planning something to remove me from Lillian's life. As I drove through the snow-covered streets of Providence, they had no idea of the grim Christmas present I had meticulously prepared, especially for each of them. The 20-minute drive to my modest home in Cranston was a blur. The taste of blood still lingered, but it wasn't the physical pain that bothered me. It was the crushing memory of how it all began. Victor Callahan was the kind of man who inherited everything and genuinely believed he'd earned it all. At 64, he presided over Callahan and Company. Construction, an empire built by generations before him, yet he carried himself as if he'd laid every brick himself. His arrogance knew no bounds, especially towards ordinary people like me. 5 years ago, when Lillian and I first started dating, he tolerated me, dismissing me as a passing phase for his spoiled daughter, a fleeting rebellion against their rigid social standards. When she suggested marriage, Victor had laughed in my face. "Do you truly think you can provide the lifestyle she's accustomed to by building backyard sheds?" He'd scoffed. pouring himself a rare single malt that cost more than my monthly earnings. Lillian had stood by me then. She'd claimed to love me regardless of money, that she wanted to build something real with me. But Victor was relentlessly persistent. He knew exactly how to plant seeds of doubt. Subtle jabs during family dinners, cutting remarks about my lack of understanding when they discussed investment portfolios or exclusive overseas trips, extravagant gifts for Lillian that he knew I could never afford. A custom-designed watch here, a collection of vintage designer bags there. Gradually, I noticed Lillian changing. She began to question why I wasn't expanding Torres Integrity Builders more rapidly, why I wouldn't accept the massive loan Victor continually offered, why I insisted on doing everything the hard way when his father could give us an effortless life instantly. "You're too proud, Samuel," she'd say more and more often. "Sometimes accepting help isn't a failure, it's just smart." But I knew Victor Callahan. I knew men like him. His help came with invisible strings that would become unbreakable chains the moment I let my guard down. The turning point came 8 months ago during Lillian's birthday. Victor had booked an entire floor of a high-end restaurant in the city's east side, inviting 100 guests, all from his exclusive circle: senators, judges, prominent developers. I wore my only tailored suit, bought from a discount outlet, while every other man was clad in attire that likely cost more than my work truck. During his toast, Victor made a point of mentioning how proud he was of Lillian for following her heart, but subtly added that he hoped she would eventually find someone more her equal. People chuckled, finding it charming. Lillian just smiled and said nothing. That night I began to prepare, not for revenge, not yet, but for the inevitable. Men like Victor Callahan don't stop until they get what they want, and what he wanted was me out of his daughter's life. I started small. I opened a separate bank account. I meticulously photographed important documents. I began recording conversations. I researched Callahan and Company, construction, their partnerships, their contracts with the city of Providence. As a contractor, I had worked on dozens of projects around the city. I knew inspectors, engineers, city officials, people Victor considered invisible but who knew exactly where the skeletons were buried. 3 weeks ago, I stumbled upon something alarming in the city archives, a disturbing pattern in Callahan and Company's project approvals that didn't seem quite legal. Bids that were won with suspiciously precise figures, building codes that were inexplicably flexibilized for certain projects. 2 days later, Lillian came home and announced that we needed to talk about our future. She said she was tired of fighting with her family, that perhaps we should reevaluate if we were truly compatible in the long run. Her words were new, but her voice was pure Victor Callahan. Now sitting in my quiet kitchen, wiping the last vestiges of dried blood from my nose, I finally understood. The war had been officially declared long ago. I just hadn't realized I was already fighting it. I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder innocently named Home Renovation Plans. Inside were subfolders organized by date, overflowing with documents, photographs, and audio files. The first was coastal zoning irregularities. The second, questionable municipal bids. The third, compromised relationships inspections. There was a fourth folder, one I hadn't opened yet. It was titled Plan B Contingency. Today, finally, it was time to open it. Just as I clicked on the file, my phone buzzed. It was Lillian. "Samuel, you need to get back here now. My father wants to talk to you." Her voice sounded strained, almost fearful. "He's found out some things about you, Samuel, things that could be very serious." Her words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. That was it, the final straw. The accumulated weight of Victor's contempt, Lillian's betrayal, and the sheer loneliness of facing a powerful empire alone suddenly crushed me. Was it all worth it? Was I sacrificing too much? The fear for my own future, my business, my very reputation threatened to overwhelm me. I stared at the documents on my screen, the meticulously gathered proof, the damning numbers, and they now felt impossibly heavy. I thought of the small house I had dreamed of building for Lillian and me, a simple life away from all this toxic wealth. Maybe I should just disappear from Providence, start fresh somewhere else, forget everything. The temptation to simply walk away, to let them win, was a dark, seductive whisper. But then a fleeting image flashed in my mind. Victor's triumphant sneer as he struck me, Lillian's cold eyes telling me to apologize. The countless faces of honest, working-class people I'd met through my investigations. People whose lives were impacted by the Callahan's greed. If I gave up, Victor would continue to act with impunity. This fight wasn't just for me, it was for justice. A quiet, unwavering resolve ignited in my chest. I couldn't let them win. I clenched my fists. My phone vibrated again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was an unknown number, but something about it felt immediately off. I hesitated, then answered. A low, distorted voice whispered, "A little bird told us you're causing trouble, Mr. Torres. Some birds need their wings clipped." The line went dead. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't just a threat, this was a promise. I grabbed my keys, the quiet of my house suddenly suffocating. I needed to move, fast. I sped through the deserted, snow-covered streets, my eyes scanning every rear-view mirror, every dark alley. I knew the city like the back of my hand, every shortcut, every blind spot. As I approached a familiar winding road that cut through an older industrial district, I saw it, the glint of a high beam behind me, moving too fast, too close. My heart hammered against my ribs. I swerved sharply into a narrow service alley, a move I knew would surprise them. A black SUV barreled past my previous position, tires squealing. I didn't stop, navigating the cramped space, bumping over debris. Then a sharp crack against my rear window, followed by the distant pop of a silenced gunshot. They were trying to flat out kill me. It was no longer just about threats or ruin, it was about survival. I pushed my old truck faster, narrowly missing a dumpster, finally emerging onto a wider street. I risked a glance back. The SUV was gone, likely realizing I'd escaped their ambush. My hands were shaking on the wheel, my breath ragged. I'd barely made it. This wasn't just a powerful family trying to control a narrative. This was a ruthless organization willing to cross every moral boundary. They wanted me dead. And that, more than anything else, solidified my resolve. I wouldn't just expose them, I would dismantle them piece by piece. I sped to Adrian Park's office. It was almost midnight, but I knew he wouldn't mind. I needed him, not just as a lawyer, but as a friend. Adrian opened the door, still in his pajamas. "Samuel," he said, "for heaven's sake, what time is it?" I stepped inside, my face still tight with tension. "The time doesn't matter, Adrian. What just happened does." Adrian must have seen the tear in my shirt, or perhaps the raw intensity in my eyes. "What's going on? What happened to you?" I let out a breath, trying to calm my pounding heart. "Victor, he didn't just threaten, he sent people." Adrian's face went pale. "Sent people? What do you mean?" "He hired assassins," I stated bluntly, my voice still holding a chilling edge. "I just barely escaped half an hour ago. I was just luckier than them." Adrian's face turned white. "Assassins? Samuel, are you serious? They tried to kill you?" I nodded, walking over to Adrian's desk and setting my briefcase down. He crossed a line. "This isn't just about ruining my career anymore. He wants me dead." And that, I met Adrian's gaze, a cold fire sparking in my eyes, "only makes me more determined. Now, we're not just suing him. We're going to dismantle him." Adrian looked at me for a long moment, his shock and concern gradually giving way to a new resolve. "All right, Samuel. Tell me everything. What do you have?" Over the next 45 minutes, I spread everything I had collected over the past 8 months across his desk. It wasn't just a scattering of random photos or documents. It was a complete, methodically organized file of every irregularity and criminal act tied to Callahan and Company. Construction. The preparation had begun after Lillian's birthday dinner. When I realized Victor was actively plotting against me, I decided two could play this game. But I had advantages he didn't know about. During my 15 years as a contractor in Providence, I had worked with virtually every department in City Hall. I knew inspectors, engineers, secretaries, file clerks, people Victor treated as invisible but who had access to invaluable information. Tommy Rossi, the chief building safety inspector, owed me a significant favor from when I'd saved his career 4 years ago after he'd nearly approved a faulty high-rise project. In return, he'd given me unfettered access to the inspection records for all Callahan projects over the past 6 years. The pattern was glaringly obvious to anyone who knew where to look. Blatant safety issues that should have prevented approvals systematically overlooked. Building codes consistently ignored on specific high-profit projects. Always the same complicit inspectors involved, always the same convenient coincidences. Elena Ramirez from the bidding department showed me something even more damning. Callahan and Company bids that consistently arrive just minutes before the deadline, always with exact rather than approximate figures, precise down to the dollar, enough to beat other construction companies by razor-thin margins. It's impossible to calculate these bids without inside information on competitors, Elena had told me, handing me copies of the documents. But the true bombshell came from Marcus Thorne, a former financial officer at Callahan and Company, who had been quietly let go 3 years ago during a corporate restructuring. In reality, he'd uncovered serious tax irregularities and had the audacity to question Victor about them. Marcus, a family man fundamentally honest but vulnerable, had initially been terrified to speak, fearing for his children's safety after Victor subtly leveraged a minor old transgression of his. But I promised him protection, showing him the sheer volume of evidence I already had against Victor, convincing him that cooperating was the only path to genuine safety. He provided me with copies of everything: offshore accounts, undeclared payments, fictitious contracts with shell corporations. Victor Callahan wasn't just corrupt. He was a sophisticated criminal who had built a multi-million-dollar empire through systematic fraud. For 8 months, I had meticulously validated every document, cross-referenced every source, and verified information with at least 4 different witnesses. I didn't just want to accuse Victor. I wanted to utterly dismantle him. Adrian Park finished reviewing the documents and looked at me with a mixture of awe and grave concern. "Samuel, this is pure dynamite. You have enough material here for multiple federal criminal charges, but," he paused, "the Callahans have formidable connections. They will try to destroy you before this ever reaches a courtroom." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone vibrated. It was Lillian. "Samuel, my father has hired the most aggressive legal team in Providence. He said he's going to sue you for defamation, invasion of privacy, industrial espionage. He has connections in the FBI, the state police, everywhere that matters." Her voice was shaky, bordering on hysterical. "Lillian," I replied calmly, "your father has committed federal crimes. I'm not the one who should be worried." "You don't understand," she screamed. "He won't stop until he sees you in jail. He said he'll plant evidence if he has to, that he'll buy witnesses, that he'll make you wish you were never born." I hung up. The phone call had chilled me, but the assassination attempt had galvanized me. I looked at Adrian. "Change of plans. We're not just going to sue them. We're going to do this publicly, quickly, and in a way they can't control." Adrian frowned. "What do you have in mind?" "Do you know Cassandra Monroe from the Providence Journal, the investigative reporter?" "Of course," he said. "She's absolutely tenacious." "And Marcus Young from Channel 10, the nightly news anchor?" "Samuel, what exactly are you planning?" Adrian's concern was palpable. I smiled, a grim, determined expression. "Victor Callahan wants a war. He's going to get one, but it will be fought on my turf with the weapons I provide and at a time I decide." I picked up my phone and began typing a series of urgent messages. The first was to Cassandra Monroe. "I have a story that will bring down one of New England's biggest corruption schemes." The second was to Marcus Young. "Do you want the exclusive that will define your career?" The third was to Special Agent Ramirez of the FBI, whom I knew from a previous minor case involving a subcontractor. "Remember when you said we'd always have an open line if I ever found anything truly interesting?" Adrian watched me, his concern deepening, his admiration growing. "Samuel, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once this information is out, there's no turning back. The Callahans will attempt to destroy you in every conceivable way." I looked out Adrian's office window. It was snowing again, blanketing Providence in a pristine white sheet. "Adrian, 5 years ago I married, hoping to find a family. Instead, I discovered I married into a criminal enterprise that sees me as nothing more than a threat to their operation." I turned to face him, the briefcase in my hand feeling heavy with destiny. "Victor Callahan thinks he can terrorize me with threats and intimidation. Lillian believes she can simply abandon me for someone richer if I just keep quiet and don't cause any trouble. They have fundamentally underestimated who they're dealing with. And tomorrow morning," I concluded, "when the newspapers hit the stands, all of Providence will find out exactly who the Callahans truly are." It was 2 o'clock in the morning when I left Adrian's office. By 6 a.m., the first calls would start. There was no turning back. The morning of December 26th, my phone rang at precisely 6 a.m. as agreed. "Samuel, this is Cassandra Monroe from the Providence Journal. I've read your dossier all night. This is going to bring down far more than just the Callahans." I smiled, taking my first sip of coffee. "That's exactly the intention, Cassandra." As I spoke with her, my second phone vibrated with a message from Marcus Young. "Story will be on the 7 a.m. news. Cameraman already positioned outside Callahan and Company construction." The third call was the most satisfying. Special Agent Ramirez. His voice was heavy with urgency. "Samuel, this material is gold. We're issuing search and seizure warrants for the entire Callahan enterprise. Operation begins in 90 minutes. While I coordinated the methodical destruction of the Callahan empire, Victor was desperately trying to save his own skin. Lillian called me at 7:15 a.m., hysterical. "Samuel, the feds are here. They have warrants for everything. My father is screaming that you forged documents, that this is a setup." "Lillian," I replied calmly, "tell your father he has 30 minutes before the press conference. If he wants to make a statement before this turns into a national circus, I suggest he use that time wisely." She hung up, sobbing. At 8 a.m., I switched on the television. Marcus Young was live, reporting from outside Callahan and Company construction headquarters as federal agents carried out boxes of documents. In a coordinated operation, the FBI has executed search warrants at Callahan and Company. Construction following anonymous allegations of widespread corruption and fraud that may be linked to millions in city contracts. My phone rang again. It was Victor Callahan, his voice unrecognizable with despair. "Samuel, you don't know what you're doing. You're going to destroy innocent families. Lillian has nothing to do with this." "Victor," I interrupted, "you had your chance to redeem yourself yesterday. You chose to threaten my freedom instead of admitting your crimes. I can pay you. How much do you want? 3 million? 5 million? I can wire it right now. The bribery attempt was the absolute last straw. Record this conversation, Victor. You just added another federal crime to your already growing list. I hung up and immediately called Agent Ramirez. You're going to want to hear the recording I just made. Victor Callahan just attempted to bribe me with $5 million. By 9 a.m., the story had exploded nationally. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all covering the Callahan scandal. Cassandra Monroe had expanded her investigation, uncovering connections to other Rhode Island politicians and prominent businessmen. But Victor still had one last card up his sleeve. At 10:30 a.m., Lillian appeared at my door, flanked by two men in dark, expensive suits. "Samuel," she said, her voice strained, "these are my father's lawyers. They have a proposal." I allowed them in, curious to see how far Victor would go. The lead lawyer, an impeccably dressed man with salt and pepper hair, got straight to the point. "Mr. Torres, my client is willing to reconcile. He admits he made mistakes and is prepared to compensate you generously." "What kind of compensation?" I asked, leaning back. $6 million transferred immediately, an executive position at Callahan and Company, and a public apology from Mr. Callahan himself. "And in return," I prompted, "I drop all charges, publicly admit that I misread some documents, and bury this whole thing?" Lillian looked at me, hope flickering in her eyes. For the first time in months, she seemed to truly see me as her husband. "Samuel, please, we can start over. I know I made mistakes, that I didn't stand up for you like I should have, but we can fix this." It was in that moment that I realized she genuinely believed I would do this for money. That 5 years of marriage, of shared life, could be bought for a few million. "Gentlemen," I said, rising from my chair, "there's a slight problem with that proposal." I walked over to the window, watching the distant glint of FBI vehicles still parked outside the Callahan and Company building. "You still don't understand the full extent of what I've uncovered." I turned to face them. Victor Callahan didn't just commit tax fraud or rig municipal bids. He laundered money for international criminal organizations through phantom construction projects. There are connections to federal politicians. There are undeniable links to drug cartels that used his buildings for trafficking operations. The silence in the room was absolute, chilling. The dossier I handed over to the FBI is over 900 pages long. What came out in the press today is only the first 50. Lillian covered her face with her hands, a low sob escaping. "You think this is about personal revenge, about a petty family feud?" I continued, my voice gaining power. "This is about dismantling a sophisticated criminal organization that has been operating in New England for decades." The lead lawyer tried to maintain his composure, but his voice trembled. "You don't have enough evidence to support these outlandish charges." I smiled for the last time that day. "I have over 800 hours of recordings, bank documents from 16 different countries, sworn statements from 55 witnesses, including former employees, bribed inspectors, and 4 informants from the FBI itself." I approached the center table and picked up a folder I had prepared specifically for this moment. "And I have this." I opened the folder, revealing high-resolution photographs of Victor in secret meetings with men I knew were under active investigation for international drug trafficking. These photos were taken just 3 months ago. Victor had no idea there were cameras discreetly installed in the exclusive private dining room where he met with Salazar and Volkov. The lawyers recognized the names immediately. Salazar was wanted by the DEA. Volkov was on the Interpol's most wanted list. "So no, gentlemen, $6 million won't solve this problem. In fact," I glanced at my watch, In exactly 10 minutes, a second federal operation will arrest Victor Callahan for association with organized crime. And you, who just offered me a bribe on his behalf, will likely be included on the list of suspects." Understanding washed over their faces in waves of mounting horror. "But if you like," I offered, a hint of steel in my voice, "I can call Agent Ramirez and explain that you were hired without knowing the full truth. Perhaps he'll be lenient." Lillian looked at me as if she were seeing a complete stranger. "Who are you?" The Samuel I knew would never be capable of this. "You're right, Lillian," I replied softly. "The Samuel you knew died on Christmas Eve when your father punched me in the face and you stood by and told me to apologize." I walked to the door and opened it. "The man standing in front of you now is someone who finally understood that some battles cannot be won with kindness and patience." The lawyers rushed out, stumbling over themselves. Lillian stood in my living room for a few more minutes, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't going to end well for anyone, Samuel." "You're wrong," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "It's going to end exactly as it should have, a long time ago." 15 minutes later, as I watched Victor Callahan being arrested in his own mansion on national television, handcuffed in front of his neighbors and the press, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. But that was just the first wave. The real tsunami was yet to come. 6 months after Victor Callahan's arrest, I sat on the porch of my new home in Narragansett, Rhode Island, watching the sun set over the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was living in exactly the kind of place Victor always sneered I could never afford. The difference was, I had earned it honestly. Victor's trial was a national spectacle. CNN, Fox News, all the major networks covered every moment of what the press dubbed the Callahan cataclysm. 16 federal charges including money laundering, tax fraud, bribery of public officials, and association with criminal organizations. The sentence was harsh: 30 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 20 years. Evelyn Callahan, Victor's wife, who had always treated me like an invisible servant, lost everything. Whitestone Manor was confiscated by the federal government as part of asset recovery. Her extensive jewelry collection, luxury vehicles, even the priceless artwork she flaunted, all were auctioned off to pay fines and restitution. The last time I saw her, she was working as a concierge at a small boutique hotel in Salem, Massachusetts. Our eyes met for a fleeting second as I passed through the lobby on a business trip. She looked away immediately, her former arrogance replaced by a quiet, profound shame. But it was Lillian's fate that surprised me the most. 4 weeks after her father's arrest, she showed up at my door. She looked utterly different. Her once perfectly styled hair was unkempt, her expensive clothes replaced by simple, practical attire, and her eyes were swollen from crying. "Samuel," she said, her voice breaking, "I know I don't deserve a minute of your time, but I need to talk to you." I let her in, more out of curiosity than compassion. "I've lost everything," she continued, collapsing onto the sofa. "My sponsors canceled. The luxury cosmetics company fired me. My so-called friends abandoned me when they found out about my father's dirty money." I remained silent, letting her speak. But the worst part wasn't losing the money or the status. It was realizing that I'd become just like him. Arrogant, cruel, blind to what truly matters. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "You were the best man I ever knew. And I treated you like you were beneath me. I humiliated you. I cheated on you emotionally. I chose my rich, corrupt family over my honest, hard-working husband." Lillian pulled some papers from her handbag. "I'm signing the divorce papers with no contest. You can have the house, the cars, everything. I don't deserve anything." "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I'm going to Vermont. My Aunt Clara runs a small equestrian center there. She said I can work for her." Start over with a clean slate. Learn what it means to work honestly. For the first time in years, I saw genuine humility in Lillian. It wasn't the calculated posture she used to get what she wanted, but real regret. "Samuel," she said, standing to leave, "I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect that. But I want you to know that you taught me something profoundly important. Integrity can't be bought, and I wasted the only chance I had to be with someone who truly had it." After she left, I sat there thinking about the irony of it all. She had finally learned the lessons I had tried to impart throughout our marriage, but it took losing absolutely everything for her to see clearly. As for me, the next 8 months were transformational in ways I never could have imagined. The Callahan scandal not only cleaned up Providence of a deeply entrenched corruption scheme, but it also opened up immense opportunities in the construction industry. With Callahan and Company out of the picture, dozens of city and state contracts became available to smaller, honest companies like mine. My company, Torres Integrity Builders, grew from 7 employees to 95 in just 5 months. Not only did we take over several projects from the defunct Callahan and Company, but we also won significant federal contracts to rebuild infrastructure that had been damaged or neglected by their corrupt practices. The difference was, we did everything by the book. No bribes, no shortcuts, no exploitation of workers. We paid fair wages, strictly adhered to safety codes, and made our financial transparency a new benchmark for the industry. The Providence Journal did a cover story on me 6 months after the trial. The headline read, "From Carpenter to Construction Giant, How Integrity Built an Empire." In the article, Cassandra Monroe wrote, "Samuel Torres didn't just dismantle one of the most elaborate corruption schemes in Rhode Island history. He proved that true success comes from character, not connections. His company now employs more people than the old Callahan and Company, but with ethical practices that have set a new standard for the industry." But professional recognition wasn't the greatest reward. The moment that truly changed everything happened during a dedication ceremony for a new community center we built in Cranston. It was a project Victor Callahan had abandoned years ago because it wasn't profitable enough. An elderly woman approached me during the celebration. "You're Samuel Torres, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Maria Sanchez. My grandson works for your company." She told me that her grandson had been arrested for petty crimes years ago, and no one would give him a second chance. "Not only did you hire him, Mr. Torres, but you paid for him to take advanced technical courses, and today he is one of your most respected site supervisors." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Mr. Torres, you didn't just build buildings, you built lives. My grandson has come home every day for the past 5 months saying he finally found someone who believes in him." It was at that moment that I fully understood why everything had happened. Victor Callahan used construction to enrich himself and his inner circle, exploiting the system and people. I use construction to build communities, create opportunities, and build something lasting and honest. A year after the Christmas party that changed my life forever, I received an unexpected invitation. It was from the Providence Chamber of Commerce, inviting me to be the keynote speaker at their annual awards dinner. The theme: Integrity in Business, Rebuilding Trust. I accepted, but not for the recognition. I accepted because I wanted to tell a story that could inspire others. On the night of the event, I looked out at the audience of nearly 400 Rhode Island business leaders. Many of the faces were familiar. People who had been at that Christmas party, who had witnessed my humiliation. "A year ago," I began my speech, "a man punched me in the face at a Christmas party for accidentally spilling a glass of water on his shirt. His daughter, my wife at the time, told me to apologize or to leave. The silence in the room was absolute, palpable. That night, many of you saw me as the loser, the simple carpenter who didn't belong in the world of the wealthy and powerful. Some laughed, others just looked away, embarrassed by the scene. I paused, my gaze sweeping across the faces, lingering on a few I recognized from that night. But what no one realized was that I didn't walk out humiliated. I walked out determined. Determined to prove that integrity is more powerful than corruption. That honesty builds empires more lasting than deceit. I told the entire story. The patient investigation, the spectacular fall of the Callahans, the ethical rebuilding of my company. Victor Callahan tried to destroy me because he saw me as inferior. He measured my worth by the label on my clothes, the money in my bank account, the neighborhood I lived in. What he failed to see was my character. The audience was completely absorbed, leaning forward in their seats. Today, Victor Callahan is serving a 30-year prison sentence. His company has been completely dissolved. His fortune has been confiscated. His reputation is irrevocably destroyed. I smiled, not with malice, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had learned an invaluable lesson. And me? I'm standing here in front of you, running a company valued at over $150 million. Employing over 400 families, building a legacy based on values that no one can ever take away from me. The applause began slowly, then swelled into a thunderous standing ovation. The lesson I learned is simple, I concluded, my voice resonating with conviction. Never underestimate the strength of a man or woman with integrity. They can knock us down temporarily. They can humiliate us publicly. They can even make us question our own worth. My gaze met every face in the audience. But they cannot destroy us because our strength doesn't come from connections or money or social status. It comes from who we are at our core, and that truly no one can ever take away. When I finished speaking, dozens of people approached me, eager to shake my hand. But the most meaningful moment came when a young, earnest contractor introduced himself. Mr. Torres, my name is Carlos Vega. I have a small landscaping company. 6 months ago, a wealthy client tried to blackmail me into doing illegal work. I refused, and he spread lies about me all over town. Carlos held an invitation in his hands. After hearing your story, I've decided I'm not going to give up. I'm going to fight the good fight just like you did. I smiled and firmly shook his hand. Carlos, I said, my voice warm with encouragement. That's all I wanted to hear. Keep doing the right thing even when it seems impossible, especially when it seems impossible. Today, 5 years after that fateful Christmas party, my life is completely transformed. Torres Integrity Builders is now one of the largest and most respected construction companies in New England. We have offices in 8 states, and our brand has become synonymous with quality, ethical practices, and unwavering integrity. I bought Whitestone Manor when it finally went up for auction. Not to live in. It was far too grandiose for my taste. But to convert it into a state-of-the-art training center for young people entering the construction trades, now aptly named Integrity Hall. Today, over 80 young individuals a year learn a valuable trade within walls that once housed only arrogance and corruption. Victor Callahan still has 25 years left to serve. Lillian, as I understand it, is thriving at the Vermont Equestrian Center, where she married a kind local teacher and discovered the simple joys of an honest life. As for me, I found something I never sought: peace. Not the fleeting peace of those who avoid conflict, but the profound peace of those who face injustice head-on and emerge stronger. The enduring peace of those who build something truly lasting with their own hands. Hey viewers, welcome to the channel. We're just getting started and your support means a lot. If you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Thanks for being here.